Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Today we're looking at the story of Patācara Theri, and she was one of the nuns during the time of Gautama Buddha and known as the preserver of the Vinaya. And her story intersects with one of the sayings of the Buddha that is quite key to our recent Poya session on the arising and passing away of the 5 aggregates. So I wanted to read an excerpt from Helmuth Ecker's Great Women Disciples of the Buddha, just on some background about Patācara Theri. So it begins by saying, Patācara was the beautiful daughter of a very wealthy merchant of Savatthi. When she was 16 years of age, her parents had her confined to the top floor of a 7-story high mansion, where she was surrounded by guards to prevent her from keeping company with young men. In spite of this precaution, she became involved in a love affair with a servant in her parents' house. When her parents arranged a marriage for her with a young man of equal social standing, she decided to elope with her lover. Having escaped from the tower by disguising herself as a servant girl, she met her lover in town, and the couple went to live in a village far from Savatthi. There the husband earned his living by farming a small plot of land, and the young wife had to do all the menial chores, which formerly had been performed by her parents' servants. When she became pregnant, she begged her husband to take her back to her parents' house to give birth there, for, she said, one's mother and father always have a soft spot in their hearts for their child, and can forgive any wrongdoing. Her husband refused, however, afraid that her parents would have him arrested or even killed. When she realized that he would not yield to her entreaties, she decided to go by herself. So one day, while her husband was away at work, she slipped out the door and set out down the road toward Savatthi. When her husband learned from the neighbors what had happened, he followed her and soon caught up with her. Though he tried to persuade her to return, she would not listen to him, but insisted on continuing. Before they could reach Savatthi, the birth pains started, and she soon gave birth to a baby son. As she had no more reason to go to her parents' house, they turned back. Some time later, Patācara became pregnant a second time. Again she requested her husband to take her home to her parents. Again he refused. And again she took matters into her own hands and started off, carrying her son. When her husband followed her and pleaded for her to return with him, she refused to listen. After they had travelled about halfway to Savatthi, a fearful storm arose quite out of season, with thunder and lightning and incessant rain. Just then her birth pains started. She asked her husband to find her some shelter. The husband went off to search for material to build a shed. As he was chopping down some saplings, a poisonous snake hidden in an anthill came out and bit him. Its poison was like molten lava, and instantly he fell down dead. Patācara waited and waited for him, but in vain. Then she gave birth to a second son. Throughout the night both children, terrified by the buffering of the storm, screamed at the top of their lungs. But the only protection their mother could offer them was her body, lean and haggard from her tribulations. In the morning, she placed the newborn baby on her hip, gave a finger to the older child, and set out upon the path her husband had taken, saying, "Come, dear child, your father has left us." As she turned to the bend in the road, she found her husband lying dead, his body stiff as a board. She waited and lamented, blaming herself for his death, and continued on her journey. After some time they came to the river Achiravati. On account of the rain, the river had swollen and was waist-high with a violent current. Feeling too weak to wade across with both children, Patācara left the older boy on the near bank and carried the baby across to the other side. Then she returned to take the firstborn across. When she was in midstream, a hawk in search of prey saw the newborn baby. Mistaking it for a piece of meat, the hawk came swooping down, pounced on the child, and flew off with the baby in its talons, while Patācara could only look on helplessly and scream. The older boy saw his mother stop in midstream and heard her shouts. He thought she was calling him and started out after her. But as soon as he stepped into the river, he was swept off by the turbulent current. Wailing and lamenting, Patācara went on her way, half crazed by the triple tragedy that had befallen her, the loss of her husband and both her sons in a single day. But more misfortune lay ahead. As she approached Savatthi, she met a traveller who was coming out from the city, and she asked him about her family. "Ask me about any other family in town but that one," he told her. "Please don't ask me about that family." She insisted, however, and thus he had to speak. Last night, during the terrible storm, their house collapsed, killing both elderly couple and their son. All three were cremated together just a short while ago. There, he said, pointing to a wisp of pale blue smoke swirling up in the distance. If you look where I'm pointing, you can see the smoke from their funeral pyre. When she saw the smoke, instantly Patācara went mad. She tore off her clothing and ran about naked, weeping and wailing. "Both my sons are dead. My husband on the road lies dead. My mother and father and brother burn on one funeral pyre." Those who saw her called her a crazy fool, threw rubbish at her, and pelted her with clods of earth, but she continued on until she reached the outskirts of Savatthi. At this time, the Buddha was residing at Jetavana Monastery, surrounded by a multitude of disciples. When he saw Patācara at the entrance to the monastery, he recognized her as one who was ripe for his message of deliverance. The lay disciples cried out, "Don't let that crazy woman come here." But the master said, "Do not hinder her, let her come to me." When she had drawn near, he told her, "Sister, regain your mindfulness." Instantly she regained her mindfulness. A kindly man threw his outer cloak. She put it on and approached the enlightened one. She prostrated herself at his feet and told him her tragic story. The teacher listened to her patiently with deep compassion and then replied, "Patācara, do not be troubled any more. You have come to one who is able to be your shelter and refuge. It is not only today that you have met with calamity and disaster, but throughout this beginningless round of existence, weeping over the loss of sons and others dear to you, you have shed more tears than the waters of the 4 oceans." As he went on speaking about the perils of samsara, her grief subsided. The Buddha then concluded his instructions with the following verses. "The 4 oceans contain but a little water, compared to the tears that we have shed, smitten by sorrow, bewildered by pain. Why, O woman, are you still heedless?" And then the Dhammapada verse says, "There are no sons for protection, or father or even kin. There is no protection in relatives for one seized by death. Knowing this, governed by virtue, the wise should quickly clear the path leading to Nibbana." This exposition of the enlightened one penetrated her mind so deeply that she could completely grasp the impermanence of all conditioned things and the universality of suffering. By the time the Buddha had finished his discourse, it was not a lamenting madwoman that sat at his feet, but a stream enterer, a knower of the Dhamma, one assured of final liberation. So Patācara, immediately after attaining stream entry, she requested the going forth and the higher ordination, and the Buddha sent her to the bhikkhunis. After entering the bhikkhuni sangha with the order of the nuns, Patācara practiced the Dhamma with great diligence. Her efforts soon bore fruit and she attained her goal. She describes her developments in the verses in the Therigatha, ploughing the field with their ploughs, sowing seeds upon the ground, maintaining their wives and children. Young men acquire wealth. Then why, when I am pure in virtue, practicing the Master's teaching, have I not attained Nibbana? For I am not lazy, nor puffed up. Having washed my feet, I reflected upon the waters, when I saw the foot water flow. From the high ground down the slope, my mind became concentrated like an excellent thoroughbred steed. Having taken a lamp, I entered my cell. I inspected the bed and sat down on the couch. Then, having taken a needle, I pulled down the wick. The liberation of mind was like the quenching of the lamp. So that's from Therigatha 1112 to 1116. Then it says, as Patācara observed the water trickling down the slope, she noticed that some streams sank quickly into the ground, others flowed down a little farther, while others flowed all the way to the bottom of the slope. This she recognized was a perfect metaphor for the nature of sentient existence. Some beings live for a very short time only, like her children. Others live their adult years, like her husband. Still others live into old age, like her parents. But just as all the streams of water eventually had to disappear into the soil, so death, the end maker, lays his hand upon all living beings, and none can escape his grasp. When this realization dawned upon Patācara, her mind immediately became composed. With steady concentration, she contemplated conditioned phenomena as impermanent, suffering, and not me and mine, not self. But still, in spite of her efforts, she could not make the breakthrough to final liberation. Fatigued, she decided to retire for the night. When she entered her dwelling and sat down on the bed, just as she extinguished the oil lamp, all the momentum she had built up through her previous practice bore fruit. In a fraction of a second, simultaneously with the quenching of the lamp, supreme knowledge arose. She had reached her goal, Nibbana, the permanent quenching of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. So the Buddha, having seen this through supernormal power from Jetavana Monastery, he appeared to her in person. He then said to her, Patācara, you are now on the right track. You have now the true perception of the aggregates. One who does not perceive impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and insubstantiality of the aggregates is useless, even if he were to live for 100 years. And so the Buddha said, better than living 100 years without seeing arising and dissipation is living one day seeing arising and dissipation. And so what we gain from this story and from the sayings of the Buddha is this thing around arising and passing away, this arising and dissipation. So in this particular Dhammapada verse, the words are yocha vasasatang jive, apasang udayabeya, ekahang jivitang seyo, pasato udayabeya. What the Buddha is really saying is that better than living 100 years, that you don't see the arising and passing away phenomena, is having just one day, having seen it. And in her case, she demonstrated that, and therefore she realized Nibbana. And so for us, it's inspiration, it's encouragement that if we truly penetrate the arising and passing away of the five aggregates, then Nibbana is open to us as well. That we can receive that wisdom and relinquish all our dealings, all our bondage to samsara. So when you hear the story of this Patācara Theri, it's such a powerful and striking one, because her situation was such that she lost her husband, she lost her sons, all in the span of a day. And then as she traveled to Savatthi, she lost her parents and her brother. So everyone that was significant to her in the world, she lost in such a short time frame. And the analogy that she uses when it comes to the streams of water is a very, very strong one as well, because you could see that she penetrated anicca dukkha anatta and understood that when you're bound to samsara and you keep birthing and you keep developing bonds, that it only ends in death. And therefore she demonstrated the type of pain, sadness, sorrow, extreme grief, and all the lamentation, being separated from what is pleasing and being united with what is displeasing, and literally not getting what you want, all in that short time span. And so her words in this Therigata verse are, he whose path you do not know, not whence he came, not where he went. Though he came from who knows where, you mourn that being, crying, O my son. But one whose path you do not know, whence they came or where they went, that one you do not lament. Such is the nature of living creatures. Unasked he came, he left without leave. He must come from somewhere, and stayed who knows how many days. He left from here. By one road he will go from there by another. Departing with the form of a human, he will go on transmigrating. As he came, so he went. Why cry over that? Oh, for you have plucked the dart from me, so hard to see, hidden from the heart. You swept away the grief for my son, in which I once was mired. Today I've plucked the dart, I'm hungerless, extinguished. I go for refuge to that sage, the Buddha, to his teaching and to the Sangha. That is how Patācara, who had a following of 500, declared her enlightenment. So it's so inspiring and so encouraging that to hear her story, to hear her words, that the darts no longer afflicted her, and that she could see her son even as another living being, another sentient being who had come and gone, and she could see the futility of clinging, being attached to that, and to therefore suffer. And her insight was very, very strong. You can hear from her words how strong that insight was. So it's a real encouragement for us to really look at these arising and passing away of the 5 aggregates, to see it very clearly, maybe to take the examples of our loved ones, the way Patācara has experienced. But in our meditation, we can examine that, to see that we cling and bond to 5 aggregates, 5 aggregates that are bound for death, and we continuously do that, and to look at the other examples of people we do not know, and to see what is that difference. To look at pets the same way, look at stray animals the same way, to see that distinction and to really penetrate this Dhamma. So through this story, we owe a huge amount of gratitude to Patācara's story and the way the Buddha has taught, because it really is so very powerful. As a bhikkhuni, Patācara achieved the distinction of being designated by the Buddha as the foremost amongst the bhikkhunis who are experts in the Vinaya, who have memorized the text on monastic training. So this is vinayadharānaṁ. She was thus the female counterpart of Elder Upali, the chief Vinaya specialist amongst the bhikkhus. This appointment was the fruition of an ancient aspiration. We're told in the dispensation of the Buddha Padumuttara, Patācara had seen the teacher assign to an elder nun the position of preeminence amongst nuns versed in the Vinaya, and it seemed to her as if he were taking that nun by the arm and admitting her to the garden of delight. So she formed her resolve and made this aspiration. Under a Buddha like you, may I become preeminent amongst nuns versed in the Vinaya. And Padumuttara Buddha, extending his mind into the future, perceived that her aspiration would be fulfilled and gave her the prediction. So it's perhaps natural that Patācara should have been particularly concerned with discipline, since in her early years she had experienced so keenly the bitter fruit of reckless behavior. So in the order of nuns, she had learned that intensive training in discipline is indispensable for achieving peace and serenity. Through her own experience, moreover, she had acquired a deep understanding of the ways of the human heart, and was thus able to help other nuns in their training. Many of the nuns turned to her for guidance and found great consolation in her advice. One example is Sister Chanda, who expressed her gratitude to Patācara in a verse of the Therigatha. Because she had compassion for me, Patācara gave me the going forth. Then she gave me an exhortation and enjoined me in the ultimate goal. Having heard her word, I followed her instruction. This lady's exhortation was not vain. I am canker-free with the triple knowledge. And then another bhikkhuni, Uttara, reported how Patācara spoke to a group of nuns about conduct and discipline. Exert yourselves in the Buddha's teaching, which, having done, one does not repent. Having quickly washed your feet, sit down on one side. Having aroused the mind, make it one-pointed and well concentrated. Examine the formations as alien and not self. Uttara took Patācara's words to heart and thereby attained the 3 true knowledges. In the Therigatha, there is a description of how Patācara used to teach other nuns of the benefits they derived from her counsel. Patācara was able to effect the change from a frivolous young girl to a Sangha elder so quickly because in previous births she had already developed the requisite faculties. Under previous Buddhas, it is said she had been a nun many times. The insights she had thereby gained were hidden beneath her actions in subsequent lives, awaiting the right conditions to ripen. When her master, Gautama Buddha, appeared in the world, she quickly found her way to him, spurred on by the suffering and by the unconscious urge to find a way to release from the beginningless round of rebirths. Drawn to the awakened one and his emancipating Dhamma, she entered homeless life and attained to unconditioned freedom. We can finish with some words from Patācara Theri, and they appear in the Theri Upadana. And she gives this long speech, and this is towards the end of that speech. She says, "After hearing the sage's speech, I realized the first path fruit. Having gone forth in no long time, I achieved arahantship. I've mastered the superpowers like the divine ear element. I know the hearts of others too. I've done what the teacher taught. I remember my former lives. My divine eye is purified. Throwing off all the defilements, I'm purified, I'm stainless. Then I learned the whole discipline in the all-seeing one's presence, and I recited it for him correctly in every detail. The victor, pleased by my virtue, then placed me in that foremost place. Patacaras alone, foremost of those who follow discipline. The teacher has been worshipped by me. I have done what the Buddha taught. The heavy load has been laid down, the ties to existence severed. The reason for which I went forth from my home into homelessness, I have now achieved that purpose, destruction of all the fetters." So what's very resonant about what she says is she keeps saying, "I've done what the teacher taught." And so she attained so many different parts to the practice, the knowledges. So the divine ear, knowing the hearts of others as well. So what's evident is that it's very important for us to do what the teacher has taught us. So do what Gautama Buddha has instructed. So when we see the sutta meditations, we must follow those instructions and follow them as closely and as precisely as possible. And in that way, we can follow the footsteps of someone like Patācara Theri. It's not that difficult for us to put ourselves into Patācara Theri's shoes. We are not alone, and she is not alone in losing loved ones and in going through samsara in this way. And so that's where we are all the same, that we need to understand that with birth there comes aging, sickness and death. And in her case, the most powerful one was the death and the death contemplation, because clearly that is what she experienced in a very short time span. And so it's such a piercing grief that she had to endure, and then the Buddha was able to actually lift that. And you can see that the Buddha's teaching was very much about being able to see the arising and passing away of the five aggregates, the khandhas. And so if we do this meditation and look at that link between craving and then clinging leads to existence, and then existence leads to birth, and then the whole mass of suffering comes because it's been conditioned by aging and death, then you really penetrate this Dhamma. And so this story of Patācara Theri is a very, very useful and powerful one when it comes to knowing why it's so important to break the link with craving. So I'll leave this segment here. We can share the merit with all sentient beings. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Wishing you all well. May all beings be free from suffering. Teruan Saranai.